Hey everyone, it's Unique History Channel. Today we'll be doing a reading from Muslim National Communism in the Soviet Union by Alexandre Benningston and S. Enders Wimbosch, and we'll be reading The Social Revolution in the East by Sultan Galiev. The Socialist Revolution in Russia is only beginning, one of the stages of the International Socialist Revolution. Sooner or later it must take the form of a revolutionary struggle. Of a desperate and decisive fight between two irreconcilable enemies, between two opposing forces, the international proletariat and the international imperialist. The civil war now raging within the boundaries of the former Russian Empire must expand and become deeper, both in its internal and its external manifestations. Gradually, with the development of revolution, new peoples and new countries will be drawn, willingly or unwillingly, into this war, which appears to be the last worldwide butchery of humanity. It is inevitable and unavoidable. The old world has become too decrepit. It is groaning and collapsing. All the earth thirsts for and demands renewal, an entirely new harmony. The decisive moment has come, not only for individuals, but also the entire peoples and governments, each of whom honor this fate irreconcilably decide on which part of the barricade to place himself. Whether you want to or not, you must take part in this war, consciously or unconsciously, become a white or a red. Indeed, the October Revolution is still not occurred, when in Russia, labor and capital, and the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, two hostile forces, have already begun to differentiate themselves, to define themselves, and to prepare themselves for a decisive struggle. The Russian Revolution was a moment in the collision between the forces in Russia, when the Russian bourgeoisie, crushed in its homeland, was compelled to concentrate the remainder of its force on the outskirts of Russia and the countries of the Entente, where, for more and less or short term, it was guaranteed a comparatively free existence. But from that moment, the anti-revolutionary struggle, which had been developing continuously, acquired an international character, and the campaign against the victorious workers and peasants of Russia, not only the Russian, but also other units of the international bourgeoisie, has been taking part, and first separated, then united. The League of Nations has become the general staff of their forces, where all the counter-revolutionary forces of the world come together as a focal point. And it is being transformed to a black international, uniting all the forces in which one way or another might serve as a barrier to the development of the revolution. Such are the premises of the International Socialist Revolution at present, and only in proceeding from them can we foresee the forms of which development might take place in the future. One of the practical problems we face at the present time that we must resolve quickly is the so-called Eastern question. This problem is one of the inevitable and unavoidable phases in the natural development of the world socialist revolution. Even if we did not want to recognize it and instead ignore it, it would stand before us in its inaccuracy and internal and external complexity. We'd be wrong if we limited ourselves to a superficial solution of the question. It needs thorough and complete attentive study in socioeconomic and international aspects. We must examine all the possible concrete forms of which the international class struggle might take place in the East, and definite once and for all our relationship to it with the ensuing consequences. We assume that the general course of the international socialist policy taken by us is correct, and that there is no need for correctives. Nevertheless, one might be aware that the problem of the East is indeed a serious correction. However grievous this might be, one must admit that up until now, all of the measures which we have taken as regards of the establishment of the correct mutual relations between Soviet Russia and the East were random and merely palliatives. In this sphere, the firm execution of a systematic and decisive policy confidently undertaken was completely imperceptible. At worst, it was a simple reflection, acknowledgement of our weakness. For instance, when Russian troops were recalled from Persia, at best, it was merely an expression of sympathy as a platonic promise of support for revolutionary aspirations of the East. In this respect, our actions began to take more or less a defined character only from the moment of the disasters in the socialist revolution in the West, when the very development of the events, the defeat of the Sparkists in Germany and many of the failures of the general strike protesting against the intervention in Russian affairs, in the fall of the Hungarian Soviet Republic, compelled us to accept the simple truth that without participation of the East, it is impossible for us to achieve the international socialist revolution. But even at the present moment, these measures do not yet have defined an established character which laws that corrected development of the socialist revolution demand of them. The task of the present article is to give more or less a complete analysis of the question. The Soviet system, as an expression of communism, is the antithesis of the bourgeois capitalist state. These two systems cannot peacefully coexist side by side. They can tolerate one another only temporarily, until one side, having obtained a proportion of forces, however slight, will minimally attack the weaker one. By virtue of the basic law of development of the socialist revolution, it was necessary that the Russian Revolution, from its very first days, would develop into a worldwide revolution. Otherwise, the Soviets and Russia would have become a small oasis in the agency of imperialism, risking obliteration each minute by the waterspout of the worldwide imperialist Bacchanala. The leaders of the October Revolution understood this situation perfectly, well trained, and tried to channel it in the direction of the international current. And it could have not been otherwise. The socialist revolution in Russia would have lost all of its inner meaning. But in a tactical sense, this process of development of the revolution was directed incorrectly. It appeared incorrect from its outward manifestations, the Spartacus movement in Germany, the Hungarian Revolution, and so on, but its totality and one-sided character. This one-sidedness consisted in the fact that the intention of the leaders turned towards the West. The task of transforming the October Revolution to international socialist one was understood as the transmission of the mechanical energy Russian Revolution to the West. This part of the world where the contradiction of the class interests in the proletariat and the bourgeoisie glared most sharply and openly, where for this reason there seems to exist a relatively solid basis for the success in the class revolution. But in the East, with its population of 1.5 billion enslaved by the Western European bourgeoisie, was forgotten. The basic process in the development, the international class struggle continued by passing the Eastern question, and the problem of revolutionizing the East existed in the minds of a scattered few, were no more than a drop of water in the raging sea of revolution. Because of the ignorance of the East, and because of the fear which inspired the idea that participation in the East and the international revolution was systematically rejected, it is true that the Western European states, including their ally, America, appear to be the countries where the material and moral forces of the international imperialism are concentrated. And it would seem that their territories are destined to become the chief battleground in the war against imperialism. But in no way we can say confidently that there is enough strength in the Western proletariat to overthrow the Western bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie is international and worldwide, and its overthrow demands concentration of all the revolutionary will and all the revolutionary enemy of the entire international proletariat, including the proletariat of the East. In attacking international imperialism only with the Western European proletariat, we have it full freedom of action in the Middle and East. As long as the international imperialism represented by the Entente dominates the East, where it is absolute master of natural law wealth, then, so long, it is guaranteed a successive outcomes in the economic field with the working masses of the home country, for it always can shut their mouths by satisfying their economic demands. Our hopeless expectations of revolutionary aid from the West in the course of the last 2 years of revolution in Russia eloquently confirm this thesis. But even if the Western European worker succeeds in obtaining a victory over his bourgeoisie, we will still inevitably comply with the East, because as the last resort, the Western European bourgeoisie, following the example of its friend in distress, the Russian bourgeoisie, would concentrate all its forces in outlying districts, first of all in the East. It would not hesitate, in the course of suppressing the socialist revolution in Western Europe, to utilize the ancient national class hatred of the East towards the West, which is always alive in the breast of the East towards Western Europe as the bearer of the imperialist yoke. It would launch a campaign of blacks against Europe. We not only admit this possibility, but we are convinced of it. The 2-year experience of the struggle of proletariat in Russia against its bourgeoisie has taught us a great deal in this respect. Examining the East from the socio-economic point of view, we can see that almost all of the object of exploitation by Western European capital, it is the chief source of material for European industry, and in this respect, it constitutes highly valuable revolutionary material. If it were possible to concentrate compute the degree of exploitation by the East by the Western capital in this connection is in direct participation in the emergence of power with European and American bourgeoisie, which have exploited and continue to exploit, then we will see the lion's share of material and spiritual wealth of the so-called whites has been stolen from the East and built on the expense in the blood and sweat of millions of laboring masses of so-called natives and of colors, of all colors and races. It is necessary for tens of millions of aborigines of America and Africa to perish with the rich culture of the Incas to be completely obliterated from the face of the earth, in order that contemporary freedom-loving America, with her cosmopolitan culture, progress and technology, might be formed. The proud skyscrapers of Chicago, New York, and other cities are built on the bones of the Redskins and the Negroes, tortured by Indian plantation owners on the smoking ruins of the destroyed cities of the Incas. Christopher Columbus, how his name speaks to the heart of the European imperialist. It was he who opened the road to the European plunderers in America. England, France, Spain, Italy, and Germany. All of them participated equally in the plundering, destruction, and devastation of native America, wrecking her expense their capitalistic cities and their bourgeois culture. The invasions of Europe by the Tamerlane, Genghis Khan, and other Mogul princes, and all the cruelty of her devastating strength pale before what the Europeans have done in this America discovery for them. This thesis expressed in the beginning of the article, which strikingly confirmed that the entire subsequent development of the Western European imperialism, when, having plundered native America, having sated itself with her, has turned its attention to the East, with India as its main goal, which, almost from the first day's appearance of European imperialism, has not ceased and aroused a feeling of greed. The entire history of the Crusades, along with the long series of later bourgeois imperialistic wars in the East, represent a carefully calculated policy of economic enslavement of the East by Western imperial feudalists and their descendants, and this policy has been crowned with an almost total success. We examined the relations between the Western European countries and the East during this phase. That is, in the beginning of the imperialistic World War, we'd see at this time the East was squeezed and convulsively withering clutches of the international capital. All Asia and all Africa were divided by Europe into spheres of influence, with only formally fictionally the independence of some of the more outstanding states such as China, Persia, and Turkey. The Great Imperialist War was the last stage of this policy, the stage where international imperialism, sensing its intimate demise, declared war on itself. Today, the victory of the Entente over Germany has provided a temporary solution to the Eastern question, Entente rule being imposed on the East. But already today, although the situation is not completely clear, the contradictory interests in the East, the basic components of the Holy Alliance, are beginning visible, and sooner or later, serious confrontation is occur. Powerful imperial states, all competing for the first place in Project League of Nations. You must never forget that it is on one hand the East as a whole is completely enslaved by the West, and on the other hand its own national bourgeoisie applies no less heavy internal pressure on the laboring masses of the East. We ought not for a minute to forget the fact that development of the international socialist revolution in the East in no case limited itself also to the overthrow of the power of Western imperialists. Let's go further. After this final stage, the second stage must be reached. The second stage is the which pretends to be liberal, which in reality is brutally despotic, and which is capable for its own selfish interests, to instantly change its stance towards former advisors. We must always remember one thing: the East, on the whole, is the chief source of nourishment in international capitalism. In the event of a worldwide socialist civil war, this is a factor extremely favorable to us and extremely unfavorable to international imperialists. Deprived from the East and cut off from India, Afghanistan, Persia, and other Asian and African colonies, Western imperialism will wither and die a natural death. But at the same time, the East is a cradle of despotism, and we are not in the least safe form to overthrow Western European imperialism. And Eastern imperialism will emerge, which time being is still under the heavy pressure of its European colleague. There is no guarantee against the feudal lords of India, China, Persia, Turkey, who liberating themselves with our help, will not unite with the imperialist Japan and even some other European imperialism. It will not organize a campaign against their liberators in order to save themselves by this means a contagion of Bolshevism.